Hi friends, today I'm showing you how to achieve this full face of makeup with a slightly smoky eye and a bold red lip for your next party or date night, so please enjoy. I like to start with the eyes and build from there. So first I'm going to prime the eyelid with a tiny bit of the Anastasia Beverly Hills eye primer. I'm just taking a little bit at a time on a dense domed brush. This is an old Real Techniques deluxe crease brush. I'm starting the product at the lash line and working my way up to the brow bone and out to the inner and outer corners. Be sure to be light with this product as a little goes a long way. I also wanted to note that this is a good friend of mine, and I asked beforehand if she was okay with me using my hand as a palette. I'll also be using a lot of her own products throughout this video, so anytime you see me touching a product's applicator directly to her skin or eyes, just know that it's her own product for personal use. So now I've brushed off any excess primer and I'm going in with the color corrector with that same brush on her under eyes so that it has time to dry down before I go over it with a concealer later. I'm using the Maybelline Instant Age Rewind Eraser Dark Circle Treatment Concealer in 150 Neutralizer, which is such a mouthful, but I'm just kind of blending it in with that brush, just all over where there's any darkness or discoloration, and then I'll blend off any excess with a damp beauty blender and press it into the skin with a beauty blender at the same time. Here you can go in with an all-over wash of a light tone shadow to take away the tackiness of the primer, but I'm just going straight in with a lighter brown shade from the Melt Cosmetics GEMINI palette on a Morphe M433 brush in a windshield wiper motion to define the crease. And none of the Morphe brushes I'm mentioning today are being sold anymore, which is sick, but you can use any smaller, fluffy blending brush for this step, and really all the crease and blending steps on the eyes. I think a brush similar to this works great for all of it. And I'll be bouncing around palettes just for the funsies of it, but use whatever palette you have with similar colors of lightness to darkness, and you can apply them in the same manner to achieve the same result. So on that same brush, I've packed a deeper brown shade from the Anastasia Beverly Hills Soft Glam palette on kind of the top half of the brush with a dragging motion in the palette. So there's not too much pigment on the tips of the brush, if that makes sense. Like I'm not swirling it around in the pan to get it on the tips of the brush. And then that allows me to pack on the color on the outer third of the mobile lid and kind of blend it into the crease for cohesion. So after wiping off any excess color from the brush of that darker shade, I'm dipping into the lightest shade of the Tarte Toasted palette to pack on all over the inner 2/3 of the mobile lid as a base for the shimmer color. And then I'm also fluffing it into the inner corner and just kind of blending it all over for a seamless blend. They also don't sell this palette anymore. They sell like a mini version of it, which I've linked below, but not the full size anymore, unfortunately. And then here I'm just going back in with that deeper shade from the Soft Glam palette to build up any pigment that I lost from blending. And then I'm packing that shimmer shade on with a Morphe M205 brush. And then once I have it kind of laid down where I want it, I'll wet the brush with some Urban Decay All Nighter spray. And then I tap the brush on top of that glitter placement to give it a pop and then help with the longevity as well. I find that really helps. Then I'm just fluffing off any stray glitter specks and blending out the edges with that fluffy Morphe brush. And then on a Morphe M432, just a flat liner brush, I'm taking the deepest brown shade from the Soft Glam palette and stamping it into the outer half of the upper lash line for a little definition. Taking a beauty sponge to get rid of any corrector creasing that's happened while working on her eyes. I'm then going to go in with her personal concealer. I believe it's a Tarte Shape Tape concealer. I don't know the color, but I'll be blending that in with a Real Techniques Deluxe crease brush, the same one we've been using. And then I'll press that into the skin and remove any excess product with her beauty sponge. To set the under eyes, I like to do one eye at a time and go over the concealer again with a beauty sponge to pick up any excess product, anything that's settled into fine lines. I like to have the client continue looking up the whole time for both steps until I'm done powdering to prevent settling before I pack on a setting powder. So here I'm using the Charlotte Tilbury Airbrush Flawless Finish Setting Powder in the shade Fair on just a cotton round. Don't know why I was using a cotton round that day, but anyways, it works basically just the same as a powder puff. So then I'm going in with the NYX Micro Brow Pencil, I believe in the shade Taupe, just to fill in and define her brows a touch. I'm not going to set them in place until later. I'm just filling them in for now. I find that the brows tend to move around a bit if you're doing foundation and powder and bronzer and all that. So I just fill them in so I have the shape, and then I'll set them later, which you'll see. Before we started, she arrived with clean, moisturized skin, so I'm applying a primer here all over the face. She has dry skin, so I'm using the Milk Makeup Hydro Grip Primer with an e.l.f. Putty Blush brush, which is actually my favorite brush to apply skin prep products like moisturizer, SPF, and primer with. Since I'm applying with a brush instead of my hands, I like to work it into the skin with a beauty sponge after to make sure it's not just sitting on top of the skin. Now I've got her personal foundation on the palette, and I'm working that into the skin with a more dense domed brush. Here I'm using the e.l.f. Putty Primer Applicator brush, working in sections, which is just how I like to work with a liquid foundation. I know her foundation is the Giorgio Armani Luminous Silk Foundation. I'm just not sure what the color is. So I'm applying the foundation with a brush, and then I'll press it into the skin with a beauty sponge. And then on the forehead, I'll set just the sort of static lines on the forehead to prevent any creasing before I move on to the rest of the face. And the rest of the face is the same technique of applying with a brush and then pressing into the skin with a sponge. I'm just not going to set anywhere else until all of the foundation is applied. And I'll just be dusting some of the Charlotte Tilbury powder all over with a Morphe E3 brush. Because again, she has dry skin, so I'm not worried about setting the makeup per se. I'm more so just creating a barrier between the liquid foundation and powder face products I'll be using, so I can blend the bronzer, blush, highlighter, all of that on top without disturbing the liquid foundation underneath. Now I'm combing the brows back into place and setting them with a little bit of Anastasia Beverly Hills Brow Freeze on a disposable spoolie. And here I'm dusting away any excess of the matte setting powder with a bit of the Hourglass Ambient Lighting Powder in the shade Dim Light on a Real Techniques makeup setting powder brush. Now that the under eye is concealed and set, I like to finish off the eyeshadow with a little smokiness and definition under the eyes. I'll go in first with a medium brown we used on the top lid on that flat liner Morphe M432 brush and stamping that along the lower lash line. I'll smoke that out a bit with the crease color we used on the top lid with a pencil brush. Here I'm using a really old Bare Minerals precision eye brush. And then with that flat liner brush, I'll take some of the deepest brown shade we used on the upper lash line and stamp that onto about the outer third of the lower lash line for a faux liner look. And then blend that out just a touch with the pencil brush with nothing else on it, just to soften it a little. And then moving on to the face, I'm taking the Physicians Formula Butter Bronzer in the shade Bronzer on a fluffy Morphe M527 brush, hitting the high points of the face where the sun would naturally hit first, and then hitting the sides of the nose and neck for a little dimension in those areas as well. Now taking the contour shade from her personal face palette, I believe it's the Smashbox Cali Contour Palette on a Morphe M530. I'm adding a little definition to the hollows of her cheeks and around her temples. I'm not doing like a nose or jawline contour or anything like that on her today. And then taking some of the palette's blush color on a Sephora Pro Blush 96 brush, I'm patting the color onto the apples and sweeping it back towards her ears for a youthful yet lifted look. And then finishing off with the palette's highlighter on a Morphe M501 on the cheekbones and dusting the excess on top of the brows, down the bridge of the nose, and on the brow bone for some luminosity. And I'm tightlining her upper waterline to add some depth with the Urban Decay 24/7 Glide On Waterproof Eyeliner Pencil in the shade Whiskey, which is just a deep brown color. So I'm just explaining to her that I'm going to hold up her lid and have her look down, and that's going to have her blinking a lot less and, not flinching so much when the pencil comes near her. And I just like to give them a second every once in a while to blink if they need to. That's why I kind of lift my hand off every once in a while. And then before I apply mascara, I like to mist the face down with MAC Fix Plus to add some hydration and melt everything together. And then I'll fan that down really well. And then I'll go in on top of that with Urban Decay's All Nighter. I think this is the waterproof setting spray, and that one's just for longevity. Lock everything in. It's going to last all night, like it says. And then I'm going to fan it down like a crazy person. And then once that's all fanned down and dry, I'm applying her personal liquid lipstick, which proved to be a challenge for me straight from the tube. So I switched to a lip brush. I'm not sure which one I used here, but it might be a Morphe B19, which, don't worry, is also discontinued, so it doesn't really matter. But anyways, we're getting the bold red lip on. And finally, completing the eyes with a quick curl and applying her personal tube of the Too Faced Better Than Sex mascara while using a mascara guard to help me properly coat the lashes without getting any on the upper lid. A mascara guard is a game changer, especially if you're trying to work fast. And that completes this makeup look. I hope you enjoyed, and let me know if you have any questions. Thanks so much for watching. Bye.